Friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 23, verses 33 through 43. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by, watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Well, I'll tell you, I'm really glad the election season is over. Apparently, campaign fundraising season never ends, but I'm glad the elections are over. So much negativity, all right? So much negativity in that time. And there's always this issue of there is one group that is the problem. There is one group where everything is, all the fault lays with that one group. And that group is they. They are the problem. They are to blame. It's always them. By the way, it happens in church all the time. Drives pastors crazy. All right? If somebody comes up to us and says, they're unhappy, we're like, listen, no they. Names or be quiet. Names or we're not listening. All right? There is no they. They is usually the person and the mirror they're talking to when they're complaining, all right? That's usually what it turns out to. So it's like, we want names. Same thing goes for anonymous complaints, by the way. They don't even get read. But it's interesting that in this well-known story, this comes up. See, when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Now, by the way, one thing to remember is that these are not ordinary criminals the way we think of criminals in terms of robbers, that kind of thing, fraudsters, all right? Crucifixion was a really extraordinary way of executing somebody, and it was reserved generally for people where they felt they needed to make an example of them to the population. It's like the end of Spartacus sort of thing, okay? And so crucifixion was generally reserved for threats to the empire. And Jesus, because of his potential to create unrest, because the Jewish authorities were upset with him, and so it created the potential for the whole province to kind of get out of control, that's why he was subjected to crucifixion. And so the word for criminals that's used actually kind of implies that these were really more revolutionaries than they were, just like a bank robber or something like that. These are people who represented a threat to the Roman order, and that's why they would use a method of execution that was such a spectacle as opposed to simply cleanly and quickly executing somebody. So they're crucifying Jesus, and Jesus is there, and in these words that we've probably heard so many times if we've hung out in church, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." There's that word again. Them. They. Okay? But the question we need to ask is, who are they? And we're going to talk about the they, because the they is a lot, all right? So we're going to talk about the they. But one of the things I also want to mention is this question of what is it that they don't know about what they're doing. It says, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Well, what is it that they don't know? I think it's too easy for us in the modern age and as Christians raised in church to believe that what this really means is they didn't know that Jesus was the Son of God. All right? I think that's the way a lot of us are taught to hear this, all right, that they didn't know that. But I actually don't like that very narrow interpretation of what it is they don't know, because that would kind of imply that Jesus was okay with the other two guys being crucified. Okay, and I don't think so. I don't think Jesus is sitting up there on the cross going, Yeah, these two, yeah, fine, go ahead, but not me. You know. Instead, I think it's not okay with Jesus that anyone's being crucified. I think Jesus' complaint with what it is they don't know that they're doing is their complicity with the whole enterprise, their complicity with the whole system that has them crucifying anyone at all. The whole system that would cause these people, who were likely revolutionaries against the system, to have a system against which to revolt. Okay? Because Jesus is there not just as the Son of God, but as the Son of God to usher in, right, a kingdom, a society based on love and compassion and fairness and justice, all of these things that were not present in the society. All these things that people would naturally rebel against. So these people who were conducting the crucifixions, all of them, forgive them. I don't think Jesus is so self-centered that he would be saying, Father, forgive them for crucifying me. I think he's saying, forgive them for participating in this whole enterprise, in this whole system. Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing in crucifying me or him or anyone. And who's the they? A lot of them. The people stood by. They didn't do anything. They're just watching. The religious leaders scoffed at him. So these are the Jewish leaders scoffing at him. The religious leaders scoffed at it. So some were active, some were passive. The soldiers mocked him. And even one of the criminals hanging next to Jesus derided him. So it's really interesting when you look at all these four groups, is they hated each other. The people weren't happy under Roman rule. The Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, constantly chafed under Roman rule and desecrations of the temple and making it difficult for them to practice their faith as they saw. The soldiers, all right, were the enemy of the people. And then even the criminal who's being crucified by the soldiers is mocking Jesus. So you have these groups, none of which like each other, united in mocking Jesus, united in consenting to this crucifixion of Jesus. And one of the questions we have as we look at this story is, why would they do this? Why would they do this? Why would these people from these very different situations in life, why would they consent to this? Why would they make this horribly bad decision? And that's what I want to talk about today, is people who make really bad decisions, and why they make bad decisions, and why we make bad decisions, and what we can do to try and not make bad decisions. There's a study about a decade ago, a really interesting study, and there was an article about it that really popularized it, but it's been widely cited since then. And it's this article, and the headline of this article in the Atlantic was, "Your Brain on Poverty, Why Poor People Seem to Make Bad Decisions." See, the poor are often a they in our society, and people often look at the poor and what they do, and they go, well, why do they do that? Why do they act that way? Why don't they make better decisions? And there was a significant study about this. And it was really kind of interesting. The way they did it's pretty complex, but it was a professor of psychology at Princeton who was one of the co-authors of this study, and they tried to normalize for various factors. To give you an example of one of the sub-studies they did, they took sugarcane farmers in the developing world, all right? And the way their life was, they're living hand to mouth, all right, over the course of a year, but they are flush with cash after the harvest that they have to live on and invest until the next year. And right before the harvest, they're at their most broke, okay? Because right before the harvest, they've invested they've had to live for a year on the money, they've had to invest the money in the planting and the growing, and so they're at their most broke before the harvest. So this was one of the sub-studies they did, where they gave them cognitive tests before the harvest and after the harvest to see how they do. They took another group of people in America who were poor, and I don't know exactly how they managed to contrive the circumstance, but they presented them with the idea that their car needed a repair. And in one group, they were told that they needed a very inexpensive repair, and it was, easy for them to handle this, all right? And the other group was told that it was going to be a very costly repair that would be very difficult for that family to afford, because we've all seen the studies that a huge percentage of Americans couldn't put together $1,000 if they needed it for a repair. And they measured then under that circumstance, having been given this news, they gave them a cognitive exercise to do and measured how well they did. Overall, when they finished the study in these various circumstances, they said that the stress of poverty, simply being poor, being in this case of in a case of financial need, on average, lowered their performance on the cognitive tests by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. Okay, imagine that. Imagine a person with slightly above average IQ of say 105. Versus a person with an IQ of 92. That's 13 points. It's a pretty significant difference in how they would perform. And so this professor had this quote, which I think is really important. He said, all the data shows it isn't about poor people, it's about people who happen to be in poverty. It's not the person, it's the context they're inhabiting. That it wasn't that people who are less intelligent end up poor, it was that being poor actually made you less intelligent, actually made you perform less well cognitively under that stress. And they said one of the things about poverty is this. They said, all of us know that when we're under stress, we may make bad decisions, right? None of us make great decisions when we're stressed, but they said the difference for the poor is they don't get a break. We can get a break from our stressors if we try. People in poverty don't get to take a break from poverty. And so in this story, there's a tendency for us to look at these different groups and blame them and say, look at bad people, bad people, bad people, bad apathetic people, bad religious leaders, bad soldiers. Just look at them and say, bad, 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 when really it might not be that they're bad people. It might just be that they're people living in a particular context. And we need to not be people who look at the story and say, oh, well, us good, them bad. But rather, start to see these situations back then as well as situations in our world today. Look at the situation, see the situation as they might, and imagine why they might make the unfortunate decision that they do. Let's look at this one. The people stood by, the religious leaders scoffed. Why would they stand by? Why would the religious leaders scoff at them? Partly because they can't imagine change. They can't imagine things being different. They can't imagine this world that Jesus talks about. Maybe they didn't like it, but certainly they couldn't imagine it. They weren't buying into this vision that Jesus was trying to give them of what could be different. When you don't have the hope for difference, you make bad decisions. Hopelessness is a context for bad decisions. A lot of interviews with persons in poverty about why it is they don't take a little extra money that they may come into and save it rather than just blowing it. And the answer they get from people is about hopelessness. The answer they get is because it won't make a difference. Because in a week I'll be broke anyway. Next month I'll be broke anyway. They've lost the hope that they can escape poverty. So they're like, if I'm going to end up broke in a week, broke in a month, and I've got a few extra bucks today, why not blow it so I have a little bit of joy? Why not blow it so I have a little bit of fun? Why not at least make a few hours better because I don't have hope for a long-term change? Hopelessness sets the context for bad decisions. The soldiers mocked him. The criminal derided him. Why would they do that? I think one of the things is if you are engaged in crucifying someone, we all know in our society that it's a horrible thing, that not only is that a horrible thing, it's a horrible thing to do to someone. We've seen this with our soldiers in combat, right? We've seen that it is a horrible thing to have someone trying to kill you. It's a horribly traumatic thing to kill someone. It's a horribly traumatic thing to be the aggressor as well as to be the victim. Right? In modern terms, you would look at any soldier participating in something as horrific as a crucifixion and only imagine how much therapy they need after that. What would it do to you to participate in something like that? It's one thing to think about being on the receiving end of it, but even think about being on the perpetrating end of it. What would it do to you to do that? So what happens when you're in that situation? For a lot of us, defense mechanism is rationalizing it. I need to mock him. I need to dehumanize him. It's a tactic armies have used for years, right? Dehumanize the enemy. Don't let people think of them as people. You must refer to them as whatever in order to deride them, in order to mock them, in order to dehumanize them, so that you minimize the psychological damage to yourself of killing them. Of course they would do that. The criminal deriding him, well, he's about to die for the cause. So he's going to defend himself by making fun of another person who's dying without a fight. This guy probably didn't give up without a fight. Jesus did. So of course he's mocking him. And the funny thing is even though the soldiers and the criminal are mortal enemies, they're mortal enemies in the same game. And the criminal, see, a lot of the people of that time thought that Jesus was going to come and take their side in the battle against the Romans. And what they didn't understand was that Jesus didn't come to take sides in the battle. He came to change the game. He came to end the battle. He came to end the war. He came to end the circumstance, to make it different. He didn't come to take sides. He came to change the situation. But if you don't believe the situation can change, if you just surrender to the status quo, that's a context for bad decisions. When you never see the possible, when you say that all I can do is to stay within the lines, play within the boundaries of what is there, that's a context for bad decisions. One man seems to make a good decision to show that it's possible. The one guy who says, do you not fear God since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? So he's in the same circumstance as the other guy, but he makes the right call. He makes the right decision. And one of the things whenever I read this, I always go, gee, I wonder what I would do. I've never been a person, because I've never been in that circumstance. I've never been in combat. I hope I never am, And I will never represent that I would be courageous, because I don't know what I would be. I might be. I might not. I'd say coin toss at best. Okay? I have no idea what I would do. So, just telling you, if the circumstance arises, 50-50 shot. Okay? I might defend you. I might throw you in front of me. I don't know. I can't make promises unless the situation comes up. How do I know how I'm going to react in that moment? I don't know. I don't think you can. Right? That's why in these kinds of circumstances, there are always stories of unlikely heroes and unlikely cowards. Because you just don't know. But we do know this. Stress is a context for bad decisions. Stress is not a great situation for making a good decision. And often the problem is that our most important decisions are important precisely because they come at a time when we're under great stress, and that's what makes the decision so important. And so there's such a likelihood that we'll make critical decisions badly because what made it a critical decision was the stressful situation itself that will help us not make a good decision. So when we look at this story, let's remember that good people in the wrong context make bad decisions, and it's too easy to judge people for that. We don't know what's in their mind. We don't know what they're facing. It's so easy to judge their choices when we're not the ones who are afraid, when we're not the ones who are stressed. I always love it when after a horrific thing happens, like a mass shooting. Had another one yesterday. It's a horrible one. I don't know the specifics of it, but an LGBT nightclub in Colorado. I haven't heard confirmation of whether it's a specific hate crime. I pray not, because it's bad enough to have it, worse when it's fueled by particular hatred. But in the aftermath, when people go, well, why didn't someone just do that? I'm like, yeah, easy to say when I read the news report, why didn't someone just do that? Why didn't someone just throw a chair at them? Why didn't someone just... Who knows? You're not there. I don't know what I'd do. And the context itself, our society often sets the context for bad decisions. Our society often sets a context for bad decisions by putting unhealthy expectations on us, whether it's for success or against balance or just impugning the importance of ethics. A lot of societal values themselves set the context for bad decisions. And so we look at people who are suffering from bad decisions, or we look at our own lives where we may have made decisions that are detrimental to ourselves, and we understand that, yes, our decisions have shaped our circumstances, but our decisions are also the products of our circumstances. Our decisions shape where we end up, but sometimes we made those decisions because of the circumstances we were in. So it's easy to blame a situation on bad decisions, but sometimes they were decisions made in bad situations, and that's why they were bad. So how can we improve? How can we do better? How can we do a better job of making decisions in our lives? There are a lot of studies out there about how to do it. For example, one thing that has hit most of us since COVID, and so it came to a lot of attention in the last year, is this idea of decision fatigue. So this article in the Washington Post talking about decision fatigue, why it's so hard to make up your mind these days and how to make it easier. And they said a piece of it is, decision fatigue just means the act of making a decision wears you out. You just make choice after choice after choice, and you just get to the point where it's like, I can't make any more choices today. I'm choiced out. And every choice you make, even a minor choice, actually impacts your ability to make more choices. You just get tired of making choices. You have a long day, you've just made 11 decisions at the office that were all important. You go to dinner, and you look at the menu, and you just tell the waiter, bring me something. I don't care. Just bring me some food. They're like, what would you like? I don't care. I don't want to make another decision. No, I don't want to choose whether I want the soup or the salad. I've made too many decisions today. I'm tired. Just bring me whatever. Bring me whatever most people order. I don't want to make another decision. This definitely happens to me. With all the project stuff going on around here, I hit the afternoon. I'm just done. I'm done. No more choices. I don't want to make another decision. Right. They've even done studies that say that people wear out to the point where they've studied parole boards, and they've normalized for like the length of sentence that the person was facing and the crime they had committed and all that, so they statistically normalize all that, and they find that your odds of getting parole are better if your hearing is in the morning than in the afternoon. If you go before the parole board at 9 a.m., they're fresh, they're ready to hear your side of it. By 3 in the afternoon, they are tired of listening to cases. But if you know, you can understand. And if you know, you can adapt. So one thing to remember is, folks, be gracious toward others who are facing difficult decisions. Their context may be tough. They may be suffering everything from stress or fatigue or the time of day. I mean, you see this all the time in your offices, right? Guess what? A parent in the office is more likely to make a bad decision when their kid is homesick. Right? We know that. And you may not know what's going on. And then to combat this, we need to make sure that what we do is create environments that are conducive to good decisions. You know the old adage, sleep on it? Statistically proven this actually is good. Because what happens if you sleep on it? You'll make the decision when you're rested, and you'll make the decision in the morning. Rested and in the morning are two big factors in making a better decision. So sleep on it is actually science. Be rested, do it in the morning. Better decisions. But also, we can help ourselves and help others make good decisions by helping create an environment that eliminates stress around the decision, that eliminates fear around the decision. Right? And a supervisor telling an employee, don't worry, if you make the best decision you can, if it doesn't work out, it will be okay, helps them make a better decision. Right? By removing the stress, removing the fear. Being hopeful helps people make better decisions. Having people believe that there are possibilities for better, that it can be better, that things can be good. All right? Hope sets a context for good decisions. And so we can not only make sure we do this for ourselves, but we can also be the people who set that kind of conducive environment for others so they make better decisions. To be hopeful, eliminate the stress, eliminate the fear. Because when you make the decision, there's such a value in knowing that you made the right one. And always, the right one isn't necessarily the one that works out, all right? It's not necessarily the result. We've all said we've made good decisions that didn't work out, but we were still confident it was a good decision. And so this man makes a good decision. He overcame his disadvantages. He says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. But one thing I've always noticed about this, which I think might be a big piece of why he makes a good decision, he's the only one in the story who refers to Jesus by name, who remembers the humanity of the person. The other people were saying, if you're the Messiah, come down from here. Are you King of the Jews? They referred to him by title, by function. He's the only one who addresses him by name and says, Jesus, remember me. He stays focused on the person's humanity. And he says, remember me. And you know, there's even some scholarship around this story, which actually has you wonder, because this guy was not a follower of Jesus, right? He wasn't one of his followers. And so there's actually some scholarly conjecture about whether he actually believed that Jesus was the Messiah, or whether in seeing Jesus as a human being about to die, he was humoring him. It's an interesting thought, that maybe he was just saying, remember me when you come into your kingdom, because he wanted to just have Jesus die knowing or believing that there was at least one person there who was on his side. And whether he genuinely believed this or not, I think the story is beautiful either way. May even be more beautiful if this person's last act was to simply say this to a dying man to try and give him some comfort, not knowing the eternal implications of this. I think it also makes it a beautiful story. But regardless, he saw his humanity and responded to his humanity, and that is something that will always help us make better decisions. And Jesus responds and says, "Truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise." And more than the promise of heaven, what I sense, what I feel at this point in the story is maybe the most important thing of a good decision. He dies at peace. In that moment, he has peace. And that's what good decisions do for us. When you make a good decision, you're at peace with it. And that's such a valuable thing we need in our lives. But we get there by being mindful of the circumstances around us, the context in which we're making the decision. And we help others get peace with their decisions by being people who help them set a good context for making a good decision. And remembering that good people often make bad decisions because they're in a context that just led them down the wrong path. And we need to be gracious toward them when they do. Amen.